going to transition over to Allison Smith. And Allison is going to be presenting on global leadership in healthy and sustainable materials. And let me just grab this. Allison is VP and Sustainable Design Leader at HKS Inc. With over 10 years of experience, she has managed 40 plus sustainability projects worth $3+ billion, including LEED and WELL Platinum projects. She's an expert in sustainable materials, serves on industry committees, and holds multiple certifications. Allison's work focuses on creating healthier and more sustainable spaces. And I must say, one of those is as the current chair of the HPDC Technical Committee and also the lead MR tag. So, Allison, you're playing such a pivotal role. I can't wait to hear your presentation today. So welcome and congratulations.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm excited to be here as well and to share this work. So good afternoon. Thanks for the introduction, Wendy. I'm also an interior designer, and HKS is an international architecture and design firm with over 1,500 people across 27 offices. And so I'm part of our mighty design green team that's focused on sustainability with my particular focus on materials and well-being. So in this project, our confidential client was inspired by Green Science Policies Institute's 6 classes approach to reducing chemical harm. GSPI's 6 classes advocates for eliminating chemicals through a class-based approach from consumer products, including building materials. And their framework is focused on PFAS, a class of chemical that are called forever chemicals because they don't break down in the environment or in our bodies. Antimicrobials, flame retardants, bisphenols and phthalates, some solvents, and certain metals. GSPI has short videos addressing why each of these classes of chemicals is targeted. And this is one in a series of industry-accepted restricted substances lists that were reviewed and considered in this project. And our client understood that the impact that material decisions have, and by taking a leadership position, they understood the impact that they could have on their employees, customers, the supply chain, and the broader construction industry. Our client desired to establish a chemical classes of concern framework, identify where those chemical classes were showing up in their buildings, and develop case studies for the employees and consultants. The client was clear that they were not solely focused on potential health hazards in their buildings, but also in the potential environmental, social, and health impacts throughout the product's life cycle. And as part of this research, we learned about the disparity in chemical regulations globally. While some countries may have more rigorous laws around the sale, manufacture, and distribution of certain chemicals, others are not as strict. For instance, asbestos is banned in the UK and the EU, but in the US is still legally used in the supply chain. However, earlier this year, the EPA brought more limitations to the use of asbestos in some applications, such as manufacturing chlorine used in PVC and other building products, which is one step closer to a ban. And with the client's global footprint, we established 3 tiers to their healthy materials framework. And today we're not focusing on this framework, but rather on some of the outcomes of this work. And this map starts to illustrate some of that disparity in how the chemicals are managed globally. This research was not limited to regulations of building products and can be further complicated by further sub-region regulations, such as state-based regulations in the US. So a keen eye is needed if using it to understand where chemicals are available or being used in products. So in developing the framework, we also researched where the chemical classes of concern were likely to occur in common building products. And we mapped this out and considered also the potential health hazards linked to human exposure of those chemical classes and prioritized the potential health hazards based on how the client prioritized those. And in developing this framework, we considered those potential health hazards linked to human exposure within those chemical classes as well, as I said. We started this work through a series of discovery activities, including analyzing industry-established restricted substances lists, performing regulatory research in some of the markets where the client works, conducting stakeholder meetings and surveys, and researching where the chemical classes commonly occur in building products. This work was significant and led to the development of the Healthy Materials Framework for this client based on their priorities. Today, I'm focusing on the assessment stage, and this included identifying products used in the client's buildings across multiple projects that fall into 4 distinct building types, identifying HPDs when available for those products, and assessing those HPDs for the restricted substances prioritized in the client's framework. That was a heavily manual process, but this assessment process can be greatly simplified with the new HPDC pre-checks available. So be sure to check those out if you want to try to do this work as well. And it's not enough to simply identify and flag where those chemical classes of concern are occurring, but we also identified alternative products that did not contain the restricted substances or reduce their presence in the for the client's teams to consider. And to ensure that we were aligned with other client drivers, including cost and embodied carbon, we assessed and compared those two. And then we also developed case studies and provided actionable guidance for the client and for their teams to use in their next building. We faced some challenges when performing this work. For instance, we analyzed the client's building products for over 6,000 different chemical search terms and reviewed each occurrence to confirm if it was applicable to the framework. And the assessment criteria also had to be really clearly defined. Otherwise, this project would never be done. And collecting and maintaining the data required really some careful management and several super spreadsheets. And we underwent extended reviews by the client's legal team to soften the language used in some of our deliverables as well. Because we were working from actual building packages, we were given a seemingly random selection of specifications, drawings, and finished schedules, not necessarily the complete package for any one building. And so sometimes it was hard to identify a specific product that was specified and installed. And when we were able to identify those specific products, there were many products that did not have an HPD to assess. So across those 4 different distinct building types I mentioned, we identified 603 building products. We were only able to identify 551 specific building products of those due to those performance specifications or other limitations in the information that was provided. And of the total building products, we found HPDs for 21.5% of those products. So although we have made great progress and there are over 13,000 HPDs published, there remain significant data gaps in knowing what is really being used in our buildings. And in this case, we could not find data for over 78.5% of the building products. Therefore, we need more HPDs to address a whole building with the same level of rigor. However, when examining these HPDs, the majority were reported to 100 parts per million, giving us a higher fidelity in the data that we reviewed, but only 2 of those HPDs were third-party verified. And these HPDs happen to be reported to 1,000 parts per million. I mentioned using super spreadsheets. Well, this is a snapshot of one tab in one spreadsheet and shows the complete list of the products with HPDs that we found. Of the 130 products listed here that were assessed, 52 had one of the 12 chemical classes present, and 2 chemical classes were not found in the assessed products. For products which were found chemical classes of concern, we made recommendations on alternative products that did not contain that chemical class of concern, or when those were not available, products that reduced the chemical class of concern. The work was reviewed by our specification writers and other designers to ensure that the recommended products met comparable performance requirements to the products that we were replacing. I should also note that for some products, the HPD indicated that the chemical class of concern was present at a range that started at 0%, but the product was still flagged as it could be present depending on what form or what formulation was used for the particular product. The client is not solely concerned about chemical classes of concern, but they also have strong embodied carbon commitments and are, like everyone, concerned about cost. So to better understand the impact of these 2 drivers, we also compared the embodied carbon for the client's products and the proposed alternatives and compared cost. Good news is that most of the products that had eliminated the chemical classes of concern also were lower in embodied carbon. However, many of these products maybe cost more. The median cost increase was 40%, which is significant. But when compared on a product by product basis, some products cost less. So we really need to consider each product individually rather than indicating that it's a trend that holds true for all healthy and sustainable products. Some of the alternative products that had other features that maybe would start to justify the added cost, or the client may be able to negotiate a lower unit cost than we were quoted, which may begin to narrow that difference as well. There were also some easy wins though in this review. I've removed the product names as this is not really the place for me to call out specific products, but noted the general product type so you can get a sense of where those options are available. You may also notice that most of the products cost over 20% less than the product currently used by the client. And the median number on that previous slide is skewed by some products that were significantly higher in price. So due to the nature of the study, we really need, so you really should consider on a cost or kind of product by product basis as well for, understanding cost. And due to the nature of the study, we needed embodied carbon data for both products, the one that the client is currently using and the proposed alternative to assess potential embodied carbon reduction. And so there are lots of data gaps within the EPDs as well. And you start to see that in those products listed here. But the data wasn't always clear cut. All of the products that were lowering chemical classes of concern, but had trade-offs when it came to cost and embodied carbon. Our clients will need to decide what is most important to them when weighing these trade-offs. Their priorities may not align with another client's priorities, and navigating these decisions is often not easy. So we can't rely on regulations to address all chemical classes of concern. And as designers, specifiers, manufacturers, and ecosystem partners, we need to continue to advocate for the elimination of those chemical classes of concern. One way to do this is to use HPDs as an actionable document that they were built to be and use them to target elimination of chemical classes of concern from our building products. This is made easier with the HPD's new pre-check, so be sure to check that out. And alternative products without the chemical classes of concern are available. And they're typically lower in embodied carbon too, but will need to be considered really on a case-by-case basis. And hitting home on these two impact areas will make the decision to use healthy and sustainable products an easy one. Costs may need to be evaluated on a product-by-product basis, as that may vary widely depending on the alternative product identified and needed to eliminate those chemical classes of concern. And data gaps are still significant in the material ingredient reports from HPDs and for environmental impacts from EPDs. The limited data means that we cannot say that a chemical class is eliminated from a building, but with the information available, we can drive for change in the industry. And in this case, state that nearly a quarter of the products of the building are free of the chemical classes of concern. But during this research, two chemical classes were not found in our assessment. And we have some assumptions on why this is the case. For example, one chemical class, we did not identify unique products where it is likely to occur because of performance specifications and the other information that was available. And we asked our client for more detailed information on these particular products, but never really were able to dial in on the particular products that were being used. And so we think that's why we didn't find that chemical class. Another class, PFAS, was not found, but may be present below the reporting threshold or used in the supply chain so that it's not in the actual product or was not intentionally added to the product and so was not showing up in the HPD for us to review. And we know that this is used widely in our industry and is in our environment. And so we were surprised that we didn't find any products in the search that included PFAS as one of the ingredients. Ultimately, this will really show you that ultimately this research is biased by the information that was available through health product declarations and environmental product declarations. And this work shows that these disclosures really are actionable, but more transparency reporting in all product types is needed to better inform product selections by designers and to enable us to create truly sustainable and healthy buildings. We hope that this work gives you hope. We anticipate that this work will be incredibly impactful for the client and for the industry, and consider the number of individuals interacting with these chemical classes of concern throughout the supply chain and the client's facilities. Helping this client minimize the negative impacts of product selection will improve the quality of life for many individuals and reduce the harm to our planet as well. Thank you.